All right, as we see more people gathering on, I'd like to welcome you to RRS Virtual, the regional approaches to fuel local circular economies, Great Lakes region. I'm Melissa Radowan, Director of Marketing for RRS, and I will be your host today. We have a few housekeeping issues that we would like to share. All attendees are muted, but we invite you to submit your questions for our speakers via the Q&A panel. We're monitoring the Q&A panel for your questions, not the chat box. So please find the Q&A button at the bottom of your webinar screen in that navigation panel. Send us your questions at any time during the webinar. We are recording this webinar, and we will post the recording to the RRS YouTube channel. We will also share the link with all of the registrants via email over the next few business days. Today's agenda will include an overview of circular economy activities in the Great Lakes region by Mark Fisher, followed by a multi-municipal perspective from Walter Willis. Susan Graff of RRS will share several approaches to take circular economy from theory to practice, and we'll end with a roundtable session with our panelists. We do have a few polls geared up throughout the webinar today, and we hope you will participate and provide your opinions. There are two ways to participate. You can grab your cell phone and type in the message recycle123 to the phone number 37607, or you can open up another window in your browser and type in the URL pollev.com/recycle123. Our first poll is coming up on the next slide, so please take a moment to connect. Again, your cell phone, you can text the message recycle123, not case sensitive, to the number 37607, or open another window in your browser and type in the URL pollev.com/recycle123. So let's get started with our first poll. This one is a word cloud. Some of you are already jumping in, that's awesome. Using only one word, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to creating local circular economies? And I believe coordination is winning so far. The more people who put in the same word, the larger the word gets in the word cloud. We do have resources, education, understanding, innovation. Ooh, finances leaps into a tie with coordination, collaboration. I love word clouds, they're so fun. We see funding, resources. There's a lot of great insight here in the information you guys are providing us. Education is getting larger. Wonderful. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. We're going to have a couple more polls throughout the webinar, so keep your cell phone handy and keep that browser window open, and we'll let you know when the next one is going to be popping up. So right now, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Mark Fisher. Mark became the president and CEO of the Council of the Great Lakes region in 2014. Prior to joining CGLR, he served as a foreign policy advisor in the Privy Council office, which supports the Prime Minister of Canada and the federal cabinet, where he focused on advancing Canada's interests in North America and the Asia Pacific region. Mark has extensive experience advising senior decision makers on a range of socioeconomic and environmental issues facing government, business, and the nonprofit sector. In addition to CGLR, he is an elected school board trustee with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and is a member of the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Water Quality Board and is a director on the board of Easter Seals Ontario. Mark, thank you for joining our webinar today.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks for having me. It's such a joy to be part of this conversation and very important conversation today. And I'll spend some of my time talking about pathways towards circularity and lessons and challenges in the binational Great Lakes economic region. But just to start, next slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit about the Council of the Great Lakes region to give you a bit of context about who we are. So the Council of the Great Lakes region was formally launched in 2013. We are a binational organization with a nonprofit corporation in Canada, CGLR, as well as a nonprofit in the United States, a 501c6 CGLR USA, as well as a 501c3 CGLR Foundation. And principally, the council was set up to really serve as a bridge between all levels of government, industry, academia, and the broader nonprofit sector to think more strategically about the Great Lakes as not only a shared globally significant natural resource that requires special protection, but also a shared economy that really is the underpinning of our economic success, not only between the United States and Canada, but North America. And so our job as an organization is to really bring those diverse interests together to really lead a new area of economic growth and environmental protection by connecting diverse interests and sectors together through conversations, through public policy research, and trying to develop a stronger regional voice for advocating for the region's interests, particularly with respect to our long-term competitiveness and sustainability. And our long-term vision is to really create the most prosperous, innovative, sustainable, and welcoming region in the world. Next slide, please. And so when you think about the region, the Great Lakes mega region, it is by far one of the most important regions in terms of economic growth in North America. It represents 107 million people across 8 states, New York to Minnesota, 2 Canadian provinces, Ontario and Quebec. It's a region that supports roughly 51 million jobs. That's roughly 1/3 of the combined US and Canadian workforce. In terms of economic activity, it represents an economy that is roughly $6 trillion in size. That would make it the 3rd largest economy in the world if it was a country. And on the environment side, it represents roughly 21% of the world's surface freshwater and 84% of North America's surface freshwater. So an incredibly important region to both countries. Next slide, please. And so when we think about this region from an economic and environmental standpoint, obviously the sustainable environmental management of this region is critical for the continued economic success and growth of both countries. And we definitely see new challenges on the horizon, not just climate change. Valuable materials are being lost to landfills and the environment. And in fact, research over the last couple of years has shown that roughly 80% of the litter found on the shorelines of the Great Lakes is plastic. The science regarding the ecological and human health impacts of plastic debris is certainly evolving. It's evolving rapidly. And early studies suggest it could cost upwards of $400 million annually just to clean up and curtail plastic pollution. So we think creating a binational Great Lakes circular economy is one way to manage the leakage of valuable waste, and particularly plastic, into this globally significant natural resource in this heavily interdependent and interconnected economy across borders. Next slide, please. And so what do we see as some of the early hurdles to achieving circularity in the region? Obviously reuse markets, ensuring that there's policy alignment across all levels of government. We've seen city ordinances, we've seen state provincial policy, we've seen the 2 federal governments sometimes go in the same direction, often in going in different directions when it comes to the policy regulatory environment that really will enable that shift to circularity. Obviously, we've had decades of conversations around the importance of reuse, reduce, recycle, but I think we need to revisit our consumer behavior and maybe rethink some of our anti-litter campaigns, because we're still seeing a lot of litter showing up in our environment and in our waterways. Recycling infrastructure. I think, when you look across the region, even though, we've been talking about recycling for some time, there are still gaps, major gaps in our current recycling infrastructure, but there's also some tremendous opportunities in terms of new infrastructure, whether it's chemical recycling or other innovations that I think, we're creating and inventing in this region that can be applied to helping support the region's shift to circularity. Obviously, with infrastructure comes investment. We know that there is a big investment requirement, so supporting that shift through infrastructure and creating those reuse markets. And so making sure that you're mobilizing financing to support that shift is incredibly important. And we certainly know that, you know, governments aren't going to be able to do it on their own, particularly in a post-COVID-19 world where lots of states and local governments are really stressed in terms of public dollars. And so finding those unique collaborations between government and industry and others and foundations to really mobilize investment to support that shift is going to be important. And then product innovation. I think when you look at the region, you know, from Dow to SC Johnson to Procter & Gamble, these are all Great Lakes headquartered companies that are global in scope and nature. And they're all leading innovators in their own right in terms of product development. And so what is the next generation of products that we could be developing that really embed recycling and reuse, you know, into these products going forward? And I'm convinced that we can lead that green chemistry, that innovation agenda in the Great Lakes region, which then becomes exportable to international markets. So those are some obviously important hurdles that we see to achieving circularity. But you know, through collaboration, you know, which was such a big word, you know, through the word cloud and coordination and funding, you know, I'm convinced that we can get there if we establish the right framework, the right platform for that collaboration. Next slide, please. And so what are we doing to help support making that shift to a circular economy? Well, to start in 2019, we co-hosted the Great Lakes Circular Economy Forum with UN Environment North America, the City of Toronto, and a number of other partners, David Suzuki Foundation, Closed Loop. You know, we had upwards of 200 experts from the region and around the world come together to really help us start to think about what a vision, a blueprint, a strategy could look like for moving towards circularity in the Great Lakes region. We were also working quite closely with NOAA through the Great Lakes Marine Debris Action Plan, and there's a new 5-year action plan that was just released in 2020 that embeds circularity into their plans now in terms of one way of trying to address the flow of debris, particularly plastic debris, into the environment in our waterways. And so you know, really trying to create the vision, but also trying to embed circularity into some of the key action plans that exist in the region. And then finally, in terms of trying to make that shift to circularity is creating the platform for collaboration. So right now we're working with a number of companies, you know, Dow and many others, including members of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste in the Great Lakes, to create the Great Lakes Circular Economy Partnership. And this really will be the foundation for action at the regional level, but also then working with our local partners, including Walter and others, in really trying to drive those key projects, those key actions, not just at the Great Lakes regional level, but at the very local level in terms of how do we enable circularity. And so that continues to be a work in progress, and we hope to have more positive news to announce around the partnership in the weeks and months ahead. But we're not just waiting for the partnership to be formed. We're also trying to take action with a variety of different partners, including Pollution Probe, which is one of Canada's oldest environmental organizations, to take concrete steps to remove plastics from the environment. And so we're working right now on the Ontario side to create the Great Lakes Plastics Cleanup Project, which uses principally sea bins and litter traps to help marinas, first and foremost, remove plastic debris out of the waterways and you know, study that debris, find out what's going into the waterways, and then trying to find unique pathways, you know, for that debris to sort of get back into our recycling stream as opposed to just going to the landfill or staying in the environment. We're also working with, and Susan will be very familiar with this, this initiative, but we're also building Canada's first materials marketplace in partnership with the United States Business Council for Sustainable Development. And they've had some, you know, quite big success for their material marketplaces, both in Michigan and in Ohio and in other places in the United States. And by creating this marketplace pilot in Ontario, once it's up and running, our goal is to really then try to connect it to the marketplace to Michigan and Ohio, and really try to create the foundation for a Great Lakes material marketplace that is both regional and cross-border, and really trying to create those markets and that flow of material, you know, as companies look for renewable content and other, the movement, supporting the movement of other valuable materials in the economy. Next slide, please. And so what are the next steps? As I mentioned, you know, we're working to identify and finalize members of the Great Lakes Circular Economy Partnership, and hopefully working towards launching that more formally this year. you know, a key element of that work will be to develop a circular economy vision, strategy, and a multi-year action plan for the Great Lakes through that partnership. And we want to invite public, private, and nonprofit collaborators to help us support and drive the circular economy partnership forward. We know that we are certainly not going to do this on our own, and I think we're stronger together, to be honest, when we work across different sectors and particularly across the border. And obviously, securing funding to start and sustain the partnership is going to be so important, as well as trying to seed and scale different priority projects. So, you know, we're quite excited about the foundation that we're creating for trying to make this shift to a more circular future in the Great Lakes. And there'll be certainly a lot more to come in the weeks and months ahead as we get going on this partnership, and being able to connect to some great partners like RRS and SWALCO in Illinois. So very excited about this work and appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about why we think it's important to move towards circularity in the Great Lakes. Next slide, please. If you'd like some more information about what we're doing, we can certainly send you some more information post the webinar. Feel free to drop us a line at mark@councilgreatlakesregion.org, and happy to try and you know, get you involved in these efforts as we move forward. So with that, I will close my remarks, Melissa, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Mark. We have gotten a few notes that we are hearing a clicking sound. We are working on that. I believe it's an audio connection. It might be somebody's mic, but thank you everyone for letting us know that you're hearing a clicking sound. We're trying hard to resolve that. So we're going to continue forward right now. I'm going to introduce Walter Willis. Walter has been the executive director of the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County since 2007 and is responsible for overseeing the agency's solid waste and resource management programs and implementing the Lake County Solid Waste Management Plan. Walter is a board member of the Illinois chapter of SWANA, an honorary board member of the Product Stewardship Institute, and was selected as chairman of the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition for 2016 and 2017. Prior to joining SWALCO, Walter worked in the waste industry as a consultant for approximately 20 years, developing solid waste management plans and assisting with solid waste facility development projects throughout the U.S. He began his solid waste career with the Illinois EPA in 1987 after receiving his master's in public administration from the Southern Illinois University. Walter, thank you for joining our webinar today.
Good morning. Glad to be here, excited to be here, and glad that there's so many people that are interested in this topic. And I hope to make some new connections today as well. Next slide. I'm going to do a little overview of the agency and our plan update, and also our venture into the circular economy. First of all, we are a joint action agency. We work together between county government and municipal government. We own and operate a household hazardous waste facility, so that's one of our core programs. Recently, we had to revise our recycling rate when we backed out contamination and knocked our number down about 10 points, but it's the real number, what's actually being recycled. So we have a 60% goal. A lot of food scrap collection going on, a lot of different programs, electronics, textiles, and shoes. So we got a lot going on with our agency, but the circular economy is key to us. And that little note over there on the side of the slide, yeah, we've been doing, you know, this idea of recycling and grabbing valuable materials from the landfill for the last 30 years, and we just really haven't called it the circular economy. So we're going to start calling it that and start focusing on that. So next slide, please. This is the result of, you can't really see really well, the last 6 years of hard work to try to develop a circular economy for food scraps and organic material, about 30% of what we throw in our landfill. So it's a significant waste stream, and a lot of good partnerships with the companies like Brightbeat, 7 Generations Ahead, the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition, the Wasted Food Action Alliance. All this has helped Lake County build out a more robust collection network for food scraps. Next slide, please. Okay, let's get to the plan update. This is for the first time in our, every 5 years in Illinois, we do plan updates. We brought the concept of greenhouse gas emissions and the circular economy components into the plan, and we had hired RRS to do that, and we completed that plan We do start to look at our waste stream differently than just, how much tons are we recycling. We want to focus on materials that have more bang for the buck as far as reducing greenhouse gases. It's a new way to look at your programs. So we've done that, and basically we came up with a scenario that if we were able to achieve these additional diversions, that we would have a significant impact on our carbon emissions. So it's just a new way for us to measure our programs. And really, the whole idea of greenhouse gas reduction is tied to circular economy, if you ask me, because the circular economy is based on more efficiencies, designing for the environment, thinking things through more, and that will lead to less energy use, which will lead to less greenhouse gases. So next slide. The circular economy component, have to give RRS, kudos for their figure here. That's their design, and it really relates to the 6 areas that they looked at and engaged our programs on. These areas are key to have these partnerships, and best management practices are kind of gauged in these 6 different areas. But it was important to bring this concept into our plan. You start looking at your lost economic opportunity there, and it's significant when you start to quantify the value of what we're putting in the landfill. It kind of boggles your mind. The number of jobs that could be created, all that is very important and lays the groundwork for better focus on a circular economy. So next slide, please. So our transition to a circular economy, well, we put it on our plan, that's great, but you got to make it real. And so that's what I am focusing on as director of this agency, is to try to make this more tangible and real and not just some economic concept. So we were going to have a nice big in-person meeting on May 14th, but we know what happened with that. So we do have a very long list of invitees, and if you're interested, I think our meeting is probably going to stay virtual. If it does, everybody that's on this, I welcome to join that workshop and see what we're going to try to do during that workshop. But this is a document that you are shown there, that a summary report that was given to all the attendees, and all this is on our website. If you go to SWALCO.org, you can see our dedicated page to the circular economy. So, next slide. So kind of to piggyback on what Mark was talking about, this whole reuse idea, and when I first worked for the Illinois EPA way back in the 80s, they had an entity called the Illinois Industrial Materials Exchange Service. That was easy for me to say, IMS, and it was very successful in the beginning and had support from the business community and the chamber. And so we've been in discussions with a company called Reaply, right when we were about to pull the trigger on working on a collaborative arrangement with them. We're also very familiar with the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development and the work that they're doing. And we'd love to take our kind of reuse platform. We kind of look at what Austin did and go, we could plug that into a bigger platform. So I'm pretty excited about the potential for that. There's our webpage. And then the workshop outcomes itself, we are going to hold the workshop. That's something we'll have to focus on. Probably late summer, early fall, most likely virtual. But we want to create this platform for continued collaboration. We don't want to have a workshop and just call it a day. We want this to continue on and be real for Lake County and Northern Illinois as a whole. We want to be able to get better data and track our progress and work with our partners on that data and that goal that we've set into our plan to reduce greenhouse gases. We really want to call to action as part of that workshop. We're going to ask people to become part of our education programs and get on our Gov delivery system, to pledge to be to buy recycle under the one of the procurement programs, to take real action and to start a new program, to enhance an existing program, to do food scraps for the first time, to buy compost. These are all things we're going to kind of put people up to task and say, hey, it's good to talk about this, but we need to start doing things. And then obviously very excited that I've got to know Mark, and look forward to plugging into the Council of the Great Lakes region and the vision that Mark's working on. And we'll do the stuff on the ground here, Mark. You do the big vision stuff for us. So I think that's it for my part of the presentation. And I appreciate your attention. Thanks.
Thanks, Walter. Now I'm going to welcome my colleague, Susan Graff. Susan is a principal and vice president at RRS and co-leads the Global Corporate Sustainability Service sector. She has over 30 years of experience in the public and private sector. Susan provides sustainability and materials management solutions to industrial and government clients, leads packaging research and recovery value chain projects for consumer brands and foundation client partners, including Materials Recovery for the Future and Beyond 34. Prior to RRS, Susan had her own sustainability consultancy that served Fortune 200 clients with enterprise-wide sustainability assessment, strategy, training, and reporting. She also served in several senior roles at the US EPA Southeast Region and headquarters offices, including Superfund and RCRA waste programs, public-private partnerships, and contributing to development of site-specific risk assessment methods and the IRIS database of health effects from exposure to chemicals in the environment. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Melissa, and good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day in Chicago, and I hope you are enjoying the same wherever you are. I think at this time of big change and an opportunity to create a new normal, I'm inspired to be having this conversation with you. And I want to offer you my working definition before I get started, which this slide is pretty illustrative of. Circular economies that are successful shift from take, make, waste, linear production to closed loop systems, resulting in a restorative impact that can be measured and needs to be measured at the scale of the regional economy as recycled feedstocks become material substitutes for natural resources and create jobs for new production, reduce energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and capture dollars into new products, compost, building products, durable goods, and new materials like recycled aluminum or plastic monomers. For SWALCO, for Walter, that amounted to about $43 million of new opportunity. And I want to talk a little bit about why this is important to do. Why? I think there's only one reason: to make new products. This is an economic system. My experience in RCRA and Superfund managing materials, we quickly came to learn that what matters really happens at the scale of the region when it comes to materials management, unlike a lot of other programs that federal agencies regulate. So municipalities are in this position of creating commodities that are attractive to manufacturers who are citing through the US and asking about these recycling systems. Very challenging work, in my opinion, with very few employees and a volunteer army of, when I was a public servant, they're customers. Our volunteer army is residents and businesses who are armed with curbside carts, dumpsters, or cars for drop-off. Thank goodness our research shows that about 94% of consumers are really motivated to recycle and think it's important to do. So next slide. Supplying these commodities really requires, I think, taking a long view and making investments for the long term. At RRS, we often look at rolling 5 or 10-year averages when providing contract support. And this chart shows the fluctuation over the program since 2015. Yes, recent downturns have taken a toll, in some regions much more so than others. But just like the stock market, over time, commodities perform if they meet quality standards for new product manufacturing. Economic shocks can be absorbed if supply contracts are flexible and acknowledge the dynamic value of these commodities. And there's markets that have sustained through this and helped create the peaks you see, like the LEED green building market, and the automotive industry has been a big driver of the commodity value of these materials. And most recently, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Plastic Pact to achieve, many are striving to achieve in global manufacturing companies 25% post-consumer resin content by 2025. This is really starting to attract domestic investment, and I think we're going to see a very different landscape 2 years from now. Next slide. Taking an even longer view, the commodities have changed dramatically, and this is really what challenges our systems today. They aren't the same commodities we were recycling 15, 20, 25 years ago. Look at all that plastic in the green you see there. This production ramped up, especially 15, 20 years ago, largely in response to the corporate sustainability movement. Lightweighting, carbon emission reduction, transportation efficiencies, reduction of food benefits, these performance attributes were sought after. However, there's a big problem. As many of you know, MRFs are not, material recycling facilities, are not equipped to handle this new time, as their equipment was to design the materials on the left. And one particularly significant material is the plastic bags, sacks, and wraps. 1.7% may not sound like a lot by weight, but if you factor in all the flexible packaging that's in use today, it adds up to 12 billion pounds, twice the size of the PET bottle market. And this presents a real challenge to today's infrastructure. Next slide. How do you set up to address these challenges and accomplish production of quality recycled materials? First, I think I've got to hand it to Walter, as he has done, organize to produce supply. I think, Walter, your program was the first one in Illinois, and it's benchmarked by many. Consolidating that critical mass of materials through supply agreements is really important to give industry a regional focal point for that supply and help them decide where to site. And this is the place the circular economy supply chain starts to get materials back into products. If you're not part of one of these in your community, think about joining one or starting one with your sister communities. Focusing local resources on consistent collection of materials and a state-of-the-art regional MRF processing hub is really important. I'll get back to the processing hub in a minute, but I want to continue on with the measurements. The second thing, when you have basically cash going in the trash, as we discussed with that opportunity number, it forms the business case to unlock funding for local infrastructure. The current amount of material available, for example, in SWALCO was over 1 million tons. It can be used to attract high interest to innovative MRF operators and end markets. The system boundaries are a little challenging because they're defined by material flows rather than political boundaries. But it's really important to set up the right measures. The next really important thing is to engage the business sector. And this is something, I know when I was in the public sector, you really, it can give you pause because you don't want to be burdensome on your customers who already have many regulations that they're trying to comply with. But in my experience, big generators respond well to recognition and supportive policies like recycling ordinances for multi-unit dwellings and commercial businesses. Many share, well-managed companies share your circular economy goals. Ask for their data in a simple format that's easy to aggregate. Local recognition programs, you would not believe what people do for a plaque on their wall. They're motivating. They help them attract talent, residents, and customers while saving landfill tip fees. Make it easy for these businesses to participate in MRF hauling programs. One of my favorite ones is the SORT program. SORT stands for Smart Organizations Reduce and Recycle Tons program. It was a Gold Excellence Award winner from SWANA. These residential and commercial streams that are sought after by end market manufacturers, the commercial volumes tracked by this program really help. And finally, develop markets. It's really important to bring global resources locally, as Mark is doing on behalf of the Great Lakes Council. When I started working on these kinds of projects 6 years ago, a real turning point for me occurred at a global business forum hosted by Case Western. As we sat, CEOs, management scholars, sustainability practitioners, we envisioned creating flourishing local economies that are connected globally through knowledge and technology. An early example was the material marketplace that U.S. Business Council began. Global companies like GM joined the marketplace region by region to buy and sell used quality post-industrial materials. And then RRS's Renew initiative has historically supported partnership and innovation opportunities in states like Colorado and Michigan, who is launching a circular economy initiative. So finally, I want to make one example or provide one example that gets back to the regional processing needed for that evolving ton of packaging I talked about. And that's materials recovery for the future, the last icon on this slide. Through a brand owner recycling industry partnership, businesses underwrote a $3 million equipment upgrade to a regional MRF to auto-sort films and other lightweight flexibles from paper, improving the quality of paper bales while making a new plastic bale. 3,000 tons annually have been will be diverted from landfill per year with the system. If the bale moves at the price of its first purchase order, which was just very recent, this new bale will add $60,000 of new annual revenue to the MRF while saving $225,000 a year in landfill tip fees. This supply is half the feedstock for a roof board plant within 500 miles in this region, creating 20 new manufacturing jobs and another 20 indirect jobs. So you see, value is realized and multiplies as the formerly landfilled plastic moves through the local economy. The product, the roof board, provides better value in roof system installations as plastic is more durable and hail resistant as we deal with climate change. And emission reduction from use of recycled plastic over gypsum or wood is significant. You can see how these economic benefits add up. And now I'll go to my final slide because I'm eager to get to the Q&A. In closing, I think embracing these 6 elements of best practice will help you reap the benefits of circular economies. In my experience, it takes a carrot and a stick. These are some of the local policies that I have found drive local economies. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with a quote that has inspired me for many years, because I do think this is a very local phenomena. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I am eager to get to the roundtable as well, but before we do, we have another poll. So everyone get out your cell phones, open up that browser window. This one is a multiple choice. So what action is your organization taking to support circular economy progress in your region? All right. Oh, it's shifting like crazy. Thank you for joining our poll. Looks like researching how to get started is in the lead, which is an excellent first step. Looks like we have some folks organizing internally, collective action, joining or initiating collective action is starting to jump out there. Policy and advocacy, public-private partnership, good stuff. So panelists, it looks like a lot of people are researching how to get started. So this is excellent for our webinar today. All right, I am actually going to move forward to our roundtable portion. Panelists are in the hot seat. We're going to ask them to dive a little bit deeper into topics around regional circular economies. And I'm going to throw the first question to Mark. Mark, why is shifting to a circular economy in the Great Lakes so important right now?
Yeah, great question. So I think when you look at just the way that the region is structured economically, whether we're talking about the auto sector or aerospace or agriculture, all these sectors are deeply intertwined, not only across within states, across states, but across the United States-Canada border. And so when I think about the way that we produce goods and the way that we managed waste, although I'm starting to stop saying waste, it's how we start managing valuable materials. We really need to have that regional approach, that cross-border approach, the cross-sectoral approach that really takes account of the flow of those materials for those recycling and reuse opportunities, right? And so I think when we look at the just the way that the economy is structured, I think the desire, I think, on behalf of the large companies, but the smaller and medium-sized companies to be more responsive from a sustainability standpoint, we have to create that that foundation, that framework that is going to allow these things to happen at a variety of scales. So I think that the Great Lakes is a natural place to look, just given the way that it's structured. I also saw an interesting question around COVID-19 and whether or not we think COVID-19 will change supply chains from a resiliency standpoint. I think without a doubt, I think we're going to see a lot of conversations happening within companies about how do they improve resiliency of supply chains. We've certainly seen the impact of being too reliant on some global supply chains. And so, you know, I think there's an opportunity to revisit how we work together across borders and across sectors in the Great Lakes. And maybe reorient some supply chains or create some new ones to make this region and to make our businesses and supply chains more resilient for the future. And I think that is a direct outcome of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and perhaps a bit of a rethink about globalization generally. Thank you.
Awesome. Mark, I'm going to follow that up and ask if there are any unique challenges we need to consider early on in making the shift to circular economy.
Yeah. So as I said, like on a plus, you know, we are deeply integrated and interconnected region. The downside risk is that we are a big interconnected, interdependent region. You know, we have 2 federal governments, we have 8 states, we have 2 provinces, we have 15,000 forms of different cities and towns and villages that have some say in waste management, material management policies. You know, we have an extensive number of different sectors and supply chains. So it's a big opportunity, but I'd say the biggest challenge is trying to mobilize and build some consensus within this region. It's certainly not impossible, and that's why we want to create the Great Lakes Circular Economy Partnership, is to create that space where we can have not only these conversations at a regional level, but also how do we then start to prioritize and drive real projects that help us shift towards circularity and connecting the region to really valuable initiatives like Walter's at that very local level. And I think if we can get the architecture right, if we can get the scaffolding right in terms of those collaborations and partnerships, we can do it.
Wonderful, thank you. Walter, Mark mentioned your program, and how do you see SWALCO's circular economy efforts working in concert with the efforts of CGLR?
Good question. I think that I kind of touched on it before when I talked about the vision and, you know, Mark's data on, you know, just the power and size of the economy in the Great Lakes region excites me that we could be leaders on, you know, the circular economy within that region and set the example. So it's always important to have the visionary, the bigger aggregator, if you will. And, you know, but it's also important to have entities like SWALCO and others that are taking the hard work at the local level, looking towards a bigger kind of vision. So to me, it kind of gives me confidence that I'm not on my own and that there's a bigger role to plug into And I think Mark's work on the plastics, that's a very important topic for our agency as well. We've been involved in the plastic bag issue for the last decade, and carpet legislation, which is basically plastic recycling. So we're really excited about that because it appears that industry itself is talking circular economy is the solution for plastics. So let's put some action. You know, talk is nice, but I'm ready for some action. So.
Well, and speaking of action, you talked about that workshop briefly in your slide deck. And it sounds like you're really pulling together the value chain and really having discussions. Can you tell us a little bit more about your goals for that workshop and the desired outcome?
Sure. Like I said, our list, I think, is over 150 people now. And since we're going to go virtual, we might make it even bigger. But we're trying to get the leaders. We've got 15 Fortune 500 companies headquartered right here in Lake County. We've got a very unique platform with SWALCO where we're able to work together as municipal leaders and use that platform to engage with our private sector and academia. So the goal is to make the circular economy kind of a common goal and understand what it is and what people, individuals can do, and then businesses themselves can do to be part of that circular economy and to just change the thinking. So that's the goal of the workshop. I like to get things done. I don't, workshops are great, but I like to see action and results. So that's what we'll be trying to do and measure with the workshop and the subsequent rollout. So hopefully we'll develop our reuse platform as well and use that as a rallying point for circular economy, and then continue to plug in with what Mark is doing and, get some good consulting help from RRS and things like that. So
We like to hear that.
yeah, that's a little plug. One other thing I do need to plug is next week is SWANapalooza. I think today's the last day to register as a SWANA, Illinois chapter board member. And David Biederman, wanted me to kind of make sure everybody knew that SWANA is on top of this topic as well. So there you go.
Awesome. Everyone go on the SWANapalooza website. Susan, I wanted to touch base with you. I see a couple of questions come in from our audience asking about more information on the evolving ton, specifically flexible plastic packaging. And I know the Materials Recovery for the Future project just released a report on the pilot study. Could you just give people a little bit more information on FPP and kind of some of that information on the background there?
Yeah, so I think that's a perfect example of a private, brand owner recycling partnership where this was a proof of concept. No MRF had ever done this before. And why did they pick this material to prove a concept on? Because it's the fastest growing, most popular format, and it has no end of life manufacturing opportunities domestically, even though they exist in other regions of the world. So it was a 5-year research effort to put together a research design and an equipment configuration that would be beneficial to the recycling industry. We'll do a whole webinar on that very shortly, really headlined by the MRF owner, JP Mascaro and Sons in Pennsylvania. But when you think about it, you've got to go after those materials that are in biggest supply, and you got to work together. This shouldn't be on the backs of one member of the value chain. Collaboration, as our participants today pointed out, and coordination is really key to solving for flexible packaging and other really popular material packaging.
Awesome. Susan, I'm going to stick with you for a second. What do you see as the biggest difference between implementing a regional circular economy program versus environmental programs that have preceded this circular economy movement?
Yeah, that's a good one. and I'm going to kind of reflect back on my U.S. EPA and my private sector experience, but I really do think it's the economics. It's the opportunity to really get engaged with your regional stakeholders who want to drive job creation and new manufacturing and new production, whether it's pyrolysis or other technologies, advanced recycling technologies, that are interested in seeing those jobs domestically. That's, to me, what's different. It's just not a regulatory kind of approach. So I think it's really super important to have organizations like Mark's and others who are, you know, looking at not only the environmental benefit, which is really super important, but the economic benefits that come from good environmental management. So I've got to say it's the economics that's really different.
Awesome. Mark, there's actually a question that has come in. I'm wondering if you could have any type of you know, financial assistance or some sort of modeling, or is there funding out there to help some of the smaller companies really get involved in you know, in that circular economy approach?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And obviously this came up as part of the word landscape at the beginning is funding and financing, right? And I think obviously when we look at our larger companies in the region, the 35% of America's Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered here, you know, they've got the capability, they've got the resourcing to really think about how they can make that shift, how they can really drive change in their supply chains in their sector. But the reality is, underneath that, there is a whole bunch of medium and small sized companies that don't have that back office capability or that financing to allow them to make that sustainable shift and to really achieve circularity. So I think we're going to have to find a public-private sector model that mobilizes financings from different sources, whether it's the companies themselves, together with banks, together with foundations, to really help catalyze, you know, some of those efforts, you know, in those small to medium-sized enterprises. Because without them, I think we're not going to get to where we need to go. So that's one point. I also think there's an opportunity around this emerging conversation around sustainable financing and ESG investing, and there's lots of big banks in the region that are putting a substantial amount of money, you know, into sustainable financing and sustainable investments. And so I think, again, looking at a collaborative approach around how do you mobilize capital, you know, I think we can develop a fund that, you know, as part of our work in the Great Lakes, that hopefully will be able to direct some resources to those companies who really need it at the base of the economy, because without that, they're not going to be able to make the shift and the adjustments that we need them to be fully part of this conversation around sustainability or circularity.
Great. I'm actually going to throw this open to all the panelists. We have a question come in. What national action, policies, or otherwise would help facilitate a circular economy?
Well, I'll jump in. As being an honorary board member of the Product Stewardship Institute, it's obvious to me that we need to talk about extended producer responsibility legislation, which brings the manufacturer into the equation with funding and also the incentive to alter design, et cetera, long term. So I think EPR on a national level in the United States, not likely, but at a state level, we've got literally over 100 laws on dozens of products. So to me, that's an obvious one to start to look at to create this circular economy approach.
Awesome. And we have a few minutes left, and I'm going to ask all the panelists to give me their last thoughts. But audience, stick around because we do have one more poll to go right after this wrap question. So panelists, can you describe in 30 seconds or less the best way for an organization to get started and get involved in supporting the changes required for regional circular economy?
All right, ladies first. If you're a business, research and reach out locally where you have a significant business footprint to ask how you can support their solid waste planning and, you know, evolution towards the circular economy. If you're in a municipal or, you know, state or federal, don't be bashful about asking for data. People always are, you know, worried about burdensome, cumbersome reporting. But my experience is if you can make a business case for it, you're going to find shared interests are being satisfied, like Montgomery County, Maryland did with their SORT program. And people do respond well to being able to put in their corporate sustainability report, you know, that they were able to participate in these local programs that help them, you know, attract people who want to work for more sustainable companies. So don't be afraid to ask for, you know, simple data that can be easily aggregated to help market your supply and grow your manufacturing.
Yeah, it's Mark here. Maybe I'll just jump in. I think one thing that you can do is to connect with us, you know, at the regional level, you know, with Walter, with Susan. There are lots of different resources out there. I know it's not always easy to track down, but, you know, I think you've got some pretty good resources here that you can easily connect to learn more and to help you think through perhaps your first strategy in terms of, you know, trying to adopt circularity into your business approaches or practices. And we'd be more happy to help you along with those efforts.
And then, you know, from my perspective, with the workshop coming up, there's an opportunity right there. So if you want to know how to get started, join our workshop. If you're in the Illinois region or nearby or not, there's an opportunity, then jump on it. And there's an opportunity right there. So I expect a really high attendance in my workshop now. So, but if an opportunity doesn't exist, I think you need to look inward and do your own sustainability practices and then start to bring that outward. So look inward, figure out what you're doing. You know, it's, you know, talk is cheap. If you're doing it and you're practicing it, then it's going to be more meaningful. And then obviously, plug into Mark's organization. I'm going to try to work into my budget next year, Mark. So
I like to hear that. Thanks, Walter.
But thanks a lot, everybody.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, panelists. All right, audience. Last poll. Get out your phone. Open that browser window. After you've heard it from our panelists, all this great information, in one word, how do you feel about your role in accelerating the transition to a circular economy? Let's see. Facilitator, love it. Okay, overwhelmed. Be overwhelming, and that's why you need to reach out to get some help. Excited, very big excited. That means multiple people out there are motivated and inspired, and I like that. Positive.
Goosebumps.
Hopeful, ready. You're ready to go. I like that. I like that. This is looking great. While you guys are still throwing some words at us, I want to, on behalf of RRS, thank our panelists for sharing their knowledge on circular economies. And I'd like to extend my thanks to you, our audience, for joining us today and making this an interactive experience with your questions and with our poll participation, which we're still hopeful and excited and ready. So please check us out at recycle.com. Reach out to Walter, Mark, or Susan. Be sure to look for the link of this recorded webinar and share it with your colleagues as well. But for now, thank you so much. Be safe and stay healthy.